After years of medical school, residency programs, and brutal overnight shifts that stripped the humanity from my bones one exhausted hour at a time, I finally landed my first official position at a large county morgue. Steady hours, steady pay, a clear, methodical routine. I examined the deceased, determined cause of death, prepared the reports, and went home. Quiet work, necessary work, exactly what I wanted. The facility sits in the basement level of a massive hospital complex. Cold, sterile, stainless steel examination tables lined up beneath fluorescent lights that never dim, never flicker, never offer you a single moment of warmth. The air carries a permanent, suffocating combination of chemical cleaners and formaldehyde that coats the back of your throat the moment the elevator doors open. You stop noticing it after a few weeks. That bothered me more than the smell itself. Only 3 of us worked down there during the day. The senior medical examiner, a quiet, precise woman who spends most of her time sealed inside her office reviewing case files. We barely exchange words unless a specific case demands it. Professional, distant, fine by me. Then there is the janitor, an old man, ancient, honestly, in a way that goes beyond simple age. His skin is deeply wrinkled, the texture of weathered leather left in the sun for decades. His posture is severely hunched, his shoulders curving inward over his chest like something collapsing slowly under its own weight. He wears the standard gray maintenance uniform, always slightly too large for his thin frame, always hanging off his body like it belongs to someone else. He moves at a slow, dragging shuffle, pulling his mop bucket down the long tiled hallways with the unhurried patience of a man who has been doing the exact same job for longer than he can remember. He never spoke to me. He never spoke to the senior examiner. He cleaned the floors, wiped down the steel examination tables after procedures, emptied the biohazard bins, and disappeared back into the hallways. I thought he was simply a quiet, isolated man grinding through a miserable job in a miserable place. I felt a passive sympathy for him and nothing more. That feeling did not survive my first 3 weeks. Our facility has a viewing room, a small, plainly furnished space where families are brought to identify their loved ones, or to spend a final few minutes with them before the body is transported to a funeral home. It is the heaviest room in the building. Medical training teaches you to build walls between yourself and the emotional reality of death, to process it clinically, to stay functional. But the viewing room tears those walls down. Witnessing the raw, unfiltered grief of a mother or a husband in that space never becomes routine. It just becomes familiar pain. People shatter when confronted with sudden, unexpected death. They collapse onto the floor. They scream until their voices break. They hyperventilate. They grab your arm and beg you to tell them there has been a mistake, that the name on the chart is wrong, that some terrible clerical error has occurred and their person is still alive somewhere upstairs. It is loud, and it is chaotic, and it is one of the most genuinely human things I have ever witnessed. Which is why what the janitor did made absolutely no sense. The first time I noticed it, we had received the body of a young man killed in a motorcycle accident. His parents were brought down to the viewing room. Through the thick wooden door, I could hear the mother sobbing in a way that went beyond crying. It was wailing, the sound of a person whose entire internal architecture had just collapsed. I was standing near the reception desk working through paperwork, feeling that familiar, heavy knot settling into my stomach. The janitor dragged his mop bucket down the hallway and stopped outside the viewing room door. He leaned his mop against the wall. He pushed the door open slowly and stepped inside. My first instinct was irritation. I assumed he was obliviously walking in to empty a trash can, completely indifferent to the grieving family inside. I almost went in to pull him out and give the family their privacy. Less than 30 seconds after he entered the room, the screaming stopped. Not gradually, not tapering down into quiet weeping. It stopped completely, as though someone had reached into the room and turned off a switch. 1 minute later, the janitor walked back out, collected his mop, and continued down the hallway. Shortly after, the parents emerged from the viewing room. I prepared myself. I expected to see their faces destroyed, eyes swollen, expressions shattered. I was already mentally reaching for the box of tissues on the reception desk. They did not look destroyed. The mother's face was dry. The father held her hand. They moved slowly, but with steadiness. They looked calm in a way that was not the fragile, barely held together calm of people fighting to maintain composure. They looked genuinely, deeply peaceful. Like people who had set down something enormously heavy and were only now remembering what it felt like to stand upright. They thanked the receptionist politely and walked to the elevator. I stood completely still and tried to make sense of what I had just witnessed. You do not recover from the sudden death of your child in 2 minutes. Grief does not work that way. Human neurology does not work that way. Over the following month, I watched it happen again and again. Shattered families would arrive, barely functional with loss. The janitor would slip quietly into the room. Within moments, the sounds of anguish would simply cease. He would walk out. The family would follow, minutes later, looking unburdened, looking at peace. I tried to position myself near the door once, pressing close to listen. Through the wood, I caught only a low, rhythmic whispering. The syllables were thick, harsh, unfamiliar. It sounded like no language I had ever encountered. I asked the senior examiner about it one afternoon. I asked if she had ever noticed how the janitor interacted with grieving families. She did not look up from her paperwork. She told me he had been working in the morgue long before she arrived. She told me he had a gift for comforting the bereaved and that I should leave him to his work. Her tone shut the conversation down completely. But the families were not the only strange thing. There was also the rule. No one is permitted to remain in the morgue past 6 in the evening. The official explanation involves hospital cost-cutting, ventilation systems, power reduction to non-essential basement sectors after hours. It is a lie. I confirmed that quickly enough. The power stays on. The lights stay on. The real rule is simply this: medical staff must be gone before nightfall. Only the janitor is authorized to remain overnight. I learned how seriously this was enforced during my 2nd month. We had a significant backlog following a major highway accident, and I decided to stay at my desk past closing to finish the autopsy reports. I watched the senior examiner pack her bag at 5:30. She told me to be out before 6. I nodded and kept typing. At exactly 6, my office door swung open. The janitor stood in the doorway holding his mop. His dark eyes found mine immediately and held them. He told me it was time to go. I told him I needed 1 more hour and would lock up when finished. He did not argue. He walked directly to my desk, crouched down, and pulled the power cord from my computer. The screen went black instantly. An hour of unsaved reports. Gone. I stood up, ready to unleash every ounce of frustration I had built up over months of exhausting, thankless work onto this old man who had just erased my progress. Then I looked at his face. The anger left me immediately, replaced by something colder and more instinctual. His expression was completely blank. But there was a tension in his stillness that read as genuinely dangerous in a way I could not intellectualize away. Something ancient and predatory lived behind those dark eyes, and it was looking at me the way that certain things look at you right before they decide whether you are worth the trouble. He told me the work was done, and that I should leave now. I packed my bag without another word and walked to the elevator. He stood in the hallway and watched me until the doors closed between us. That night planted something in my mind that refused to die. The impossible calming of the families. The rigid isolation. The senior examiner's sharp, defensive silence. Every piece pointed toward something fundamentally wrong happening in that basement after hours. My scientific training does not tolerate unanswered questions. I needed to know what he was doing when the doors were locked and everyone else was gone. 3 days ago, I got my answer. We received the body of a young woman that afternoon. A sudden, catastrophic medical failure. Her family arrived shortly after, a large group of them, parents, siblings, a fiancé. The viewing room could not contain the sound of their grief. The wailing penetrated the walls of the examination suites. It was one of the worst I had heard. I watched from the end of the hallway as the janitor made his slow, shuffling approach. He pushed open the door to the viewing room and stepped inside. 40 seconds later, silence. 5 minutes after that, the family walked out. They held each other softly, spoke in low voices, wiped away a few remaining tears. The crushing, suffocating despair that had filled that room minutes earlier was simply gone. They looked like people walking out of a weight they had expected to carry forever. At 5:30, I packed my bag. I said goodnight to the senior examiner. I walked down the main hallway toward the elevators and stepped through the heavy fire door into the old supply storage room instead. The room is full of dusty boxes, broken chairs, outdated filing cabinets. Nobody uses it. I squeezed behind a tall metal shelving unit, sat on the cold floor, and waited. 6 o'clock came. The main doors locked in the distance. The ambient sounds of daytime activity faded into complete silence. Cold seeped through my scrubs. I waited. Then I heard it. Heavy mechanical clanking. The squeal of metal hinges. Coming from the cold storage room down the hall, where we keep the refrigeration units housing bodies before and after examination. I moved to the fire door and cracked it open. The main overhead lights were off. Only the faint green glow of the emergency exit signs provided any illumination. I slipped into the hallway. I walked silently toward the cold storage room. My heartbeat was so loud I was certain it would give me away. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn back, to find an exit, to get out of the basement. I kept walking. The cold storage door was slightly open. I pressed my back against the wall beside the door frame and listened. A wet, heavy, tearing sound, like thick fabric being ripped apart with bare hands, mixed with a squelching I could not immediately categorize, followed by a rhythmic, wet smacking. Someone was eating. I leaned forward and looked through the gap. One refrigeration drawer was open, its small internal light providing the only illumination in the room. On the metal tray lay the young woman who had been brought in that afternoon. Standing over her was the janitor. His pale, wrinkled back was facing me. Both arms were buried deep inside the abdominal cavity of the body. As I watched, his shoulders heaved backward and he pulled his hands free with a wet, sucking sound. In his long, blood-soaked fingers was a dark, heavy mass of tissue. Her liver! He raised it toward his face. His jaw dropped. It dropped far lower than a human jaw can drop, unhinging in a way that restructured the geometry of his face entirely. His teeth, exposed in the dim light, were jagged, sharp, and completely black. He bit into the organ. The sound of his chewing filled the cold, echoing room. I clamped my hand over my mouth. I stepped backward. My heel caught the edge of a heavy plastic biohazard bin. It hit the floor with a crash that sounded enormous in the silence. The chewing stopped. A growl came from inside the room. Low, vibrating, generated deep in a chest that held something far older and more dangerous than a human being. He asked who was there. I ran. I sprinted down the dark hallway, shoes slipping on the polished tiles. Behind me, the cold storage door exploded open against the concrete wall. Then came his footsteps, heavy, impossibly fast, accompanied by the clicking of long fingernails against the floor. I cut through the autopsy suite, plunging through the swinging double doors into the dark examination room. I scrambled behind a steel table and pressed myself against the far cabinet, holding my breath. The doors burst open. He entered the room. In the faint ambient light from the hallway, I could see him clearly. Blood covered him from his chest to his chin. His posture had changed entirely. He stood tall, his frame seeming to expand in the darkness, his limbs appearing too long for his body. His fingers dragged against the sides of the examination tables as he walked slowly down the room. He said I had not left. He said I had broken the rule. He said he had told me the work was done. I watched him from beneath the table, tears running silently down my face. He walked past me. I gathered every particle of nerve I had left and shifted my weight, preparing to bolt for the doors. A blood-soaked hand dropped from above the table and locked onto my shoulder. He pulled me upward with one hand as if I weighed nothing and threw me across the room. I hit a rolling instrument cart and collapsed onto my back. Every tool clattered to the floor around me. When I looked up, he was standing over me. His eyes were solid black. No white, no iris, just darkness. Blood dripped from his chin onto my scrubs. I pressed my back against the wall. Nowhere left to go. I told him I would not say anything. I promised. He crouched down until his face was inches from mine. The smell hit me in a wave, raw meat and old blood and something underneath it both older and colder than either. He asked if I knew what he was. I shook my head. He told me he was a ghoul, that he consumed the flesh of the dead, that it was his nature, the mechanism by which he sustained himself. He told me his kind had been digging in graveyards for centuries, breaking open wooden boxes in the mud and the dark, always hunted, always dangerous, always desperate. Then the world changed, he said. Humans became organized. They built massive, climate-controlled facilities and gathered their dead in one place, laid out neatly on steel tables. He told me he took the liver specifically, the richest organ, he said. The one holding the deepest biological and spiritual essence. He took it, and the senior examiner signed paperwork attributing missing tissue to trauma or decay. The bodies went to cremation or burial. No one noticed. No one asked. I asked him about the families. He smiled. The expression restructured his face into something that made my stomach turn. He told me grief is toxic energy, that when he consumed the essence of the dead, he created a void, and that when he whispered the ancient words of transaction over a grieving family, he pulled their pain into that void. He took their agony and left them with peace. The hospital received a reputation for unusually compassionate end-of-life experiences. The administration asked no questions. The senior examiner looked away, and he ate in peace. Then he grabbed my collar and told me I was a loose thread. That I told him I understood the arrangement. I told him he needed me during the day to process the bodies and sign the paperwork. I told him I would do exactly what the senior examiner did. I would help him. I just needed to survive. He stared at me for a long time, those black eyes searching my face for any trace of deception. Then he pressed his cold lips against my ear and told me very quietly what would happen if I ever broke the arrangement. He was specific. He was calm. He was utterly convincing. He released my collar, stood to his full, impossible height, and told me to go home. The work was done. I lay on the floor of that autopsy suite for a long time after his footsteps faded back down the hallway. When I finally found the strength to stand, I ran up the back stairwell and pushed out into the cold night air of the parking lot. I stood there shaking so violently I could barely stay on my feet. I have called in sick for 3 days. Tomorrow I go back. I go back because the alternative is worse. I go back because a thing that has survived for centuries by never leaving loose threads has my home address on my employee file. I go back because the arrangement is the only thing standing between me and becoming something he does not have to wait for. I am writing this because the weight of carrying it alone is becoming unbearable. I am a physician. I swore an oath to protect the living. Surviving, apparently, requires feeding the dead to a monster. Tomorrow I will put on my scrubs. I will walk through those basement doors. I will nod to the old man with them up. And I will never, under any circumstances, stay past 6.